Our guest is Mr. Jim Uhls, the scriptwriter of the film. So give a big hand.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Uhls, we'll see you on the big screen here in the cinema. I have to say, I saw this film, The Fight Club, for the first time when I was 16. So I think it was an important film in my film buff career, I have to say. Probably also for many others that's seen it around that age. And I'm curious, how do you see it after over 20 years from the premiere? How do you perceive it? Are you still happy with your work?
Oh, okay. I was saying that I saw it about nine months ago, and it seemed like it held up and that it was not dated. So I was happy about that.
Okay, so as it being a script writing festival, we're gonna, of course, focus on the script. But my first question would, of course, be about the book, Czech Palahniuk's debut novel, Fight Club. As I believe you've read the book before it was even published. Is it true?
Yes. A friend of mine who worked for a producer said, you have to read this. She was familiar with my writing, and which was mostly exposed in the business by way of this one particular original screenplay I wrote that was a bit off-center, you know. And she said, you have to read this. No one's going to make it into a movie. It's already been passed on by every studio in town, but you have to read it. So I said, okay. And I read it, and it was a typed manuscript. And I just thought, the first thing I thought of was A Clockwork Orange. That kind of really vicious commentary where you have satire and violence mixed together. And the violence in that movie had just reinforced the intellectual ideas that were in the film. But I also thought it's not going to be made. But what my thought was, this will never be a movie, but to be paid to write a screenplay about it, even though it will never be made, that would be a fun, fun job to get. You know? I'd already been writing scripts based on books. And so I called her back. I said, well, is there, is there any hope for this anywhere? And she said, yes. 20th Century Fox has just formed another studio within a studio. They already had, I forgot what it's called. But anyway, they formed Fox 2000, they called it. And Laura Ziskin was put in charge of it. And several people on the staff were, it was a good collection of people. I don't know how Laura got the book, but she got the book, not from me. She got it, and she wanted it to be a Fox 2000 movie. And then somewhere around that time, I was doing my own work, and I sort of got in with the two guys who were the producers on it at the time, who were Ross Bell and Josh Donnan. And I just kept having meetings where I talked about it. And it was like the game that my agent and I were playing. It was just to make their consciousness think of me as already being the screenwriter of it. And it still wasn't even necessarily going to be made. And then one of the people at Fox 2000 who worked out of the New York office read my original script, the screenplay, that sort of I was using as my calling card. And he sent it all the way up to the person above him, Kevin McCormick, and Kevin gave it to Laura Ziskin. So this is possibly the right writer. Laura basically had a short list. It was either me or Buck Henry. But I was an acquaintance of David Fincher. And when Laura got him interested, I had an advantage, at least in knowing David. And so what happened is they were going, well, let's officially hear Jim Uhls's pitch about how he will write a screenplay. So they set this big lunch, and they had Fincher at the lunch. They had the producers. Laura Ziskin was there, Kevin McCormick representing Fox 2000. And I showed up early. They said, well, where's this table? And somebody pointed it out. There was a big round table. I said, well, I'm the first one here, but I'll go to the table. And I stood up and waited. And Fincher was the next person through the door. So we sat down together and started talking. And then everyone else came in. And visually, they already thought of us as working together. And basically, I initiated a conversation with everyone about what kind of things could be done to make this movie. And that went on for 2 hours, and I never pitched myself. I just conducted this conversation for 2 hours. And after that, they made David Fincher's deal, and they made my deal, and that was it.
Okay, so this is the first tip to our audience. It's good to choose your place in restaurant wisely. Okay, so you took a novel by Jack Palahniuk, then unpublished writer. This was his first published novel, but you had to turn it into a movie script. And of course, the book is with the first person narrative, and I imagine it was quite a task to do because you probably, as in many cases, you had to get rid of some parts, maybe add some parts. I know that the beginning is slightly different than in the book. So could you tell us how you worked on the literature material, on the book material you had as a base?
Well, we knew, of course, there would be a voiceover because we loved the writing of the first person in the book. But it couldn't just overtake everything. And the book is extremely centered on that person talking about what's happening. And we knew that it had to be, we had to have a cast of characters in this that were fully alive. So we just, I had my first version of which lines I would put in from the book as voiceover, and what I would leave out. And some of it was, I invented my own voiceover. And then I went through, and when there were not scenes, real scenes, I made scenes out of things that were not fully developed as scenes. One example was when they met for the first time. In the novel, it's on a beach. It's a nude beach, actually. And there's no dialogue, except that the character who narrates said that Tyler says that perfection only lasts a moment. He made a hand out of sand, and it was a shadow, and it was grabbing like that, the shadow. And he sat where the fingers were holding him for, just a couple minutes while the sun shined and put the shadow on him. That's the chapter where they meet. That's it. And I just thought, no, they've got to, it's not only got to be a scene, but we're going to have been so immersed in the narrator's version of the world. We're going to laugh at it. We're going to agree with him. We're going to be on his side about this stuff. Material things not mattering. we're going to be very, very, in his mind, he's the lead. And then all of a sudden, a character has to come along and become more than him. And he has to follow the character. That's not easy, really. And I tried to do it basically all in one scene. He's on an airplane because he does that a lot. He flies a lot. I figured he's going to meet Tyler on the airplane. He always calls the people who sit next to him a single serving friend. And Tyler is one. I thought that's a perfect way to have a scene with them. And by the end of it, I wanted, we called the character Jack, the narrator. He actually, his name is never revealed either in the book or the film. But we called him Jack on paper, and we go. Is spellbound by this person. And the audience has to be, really. We have to be able to go forward experiencing Tyler as the one who has the worldview now that we are switching to a little bit from Jack's worldview. And we want to think Tyler is fun at first. And so all that had to be done, and it wasn't really done in the book, It was just said, and that's it. But I needed to actually show them, make this sort of transition to where Tyler is pulling the film after that. So there were moments like that all throughout that I had to create. And what was great about the experience was that Chuck Palahniuk and David Fincher both said that things that I invented sounded like the novel, and that's what I wanted. I wanted anything I did to sound like you were reading the novel. So what's interesting about adaptation is that sometimes when you change something from the way it's written in the novel, the experience of it in a movie is more like reading the novel than if you had done it exactly like the novel had it. And that's true of all adaptation. It's a strange thing about film, It's a different medium completely.
Okay, because you mentioned the narrator, the voiceover narration. It's not that common in fiction films, right? It's we associate it more with documentaries maybe, and it's a risky business, right? Taking a voiceover narration. So I'm curious whether you was there any moment when you considered not using it? I mean, it works perfectly, of course, but yes. I can imagine that it wasn't that obvious while writing, right?
Well, that was in the beginning. I mean, that was in the beginning discussions before I started the first draft. Should there be a voiceover? Because it has a bad reputation in film. It's like a crutch that people use to give exposition out, and it's just not viewed very well. There's a few examples in history, film history, where it was good, like Sunset Boulevard, where the character is cynical about his own death. And I think probably that was my inspiration, was William Holden narrating Sunset Boulevard. I wanted something like that. I think Dan David did too. We wanted the narration to be separate, to have its own life aside from what's happening, and never, if we could, unless we need to sneak it in, not let it be a crutch for storytelling. Let it just be an additional aspect of the experience. But we realized it was necessary because too many of the ideas that the narrator had just would have sounded worse in a scene if you had no voiceover. if you got all his thinking and his ideas, and Tyler's as well, in scenes, it would have been too, I don't know, too didactic of a movie.
And while working on the script, were you in contact with Chuck Palahniuk, or you contacted him only after you wrote? Or I'm just curious whether, because I know it can be a bit troublesome maybe while working on somebody else's text. He might want to have too much input and so on. So I'm curious how this relation looked like.
Well, it was great. We brought Chuck down intentionally. There was no legal contractual way that Chuck could insinuate himself into. We didn't have to talk to him, but we wanted to talk to him. So we brought him down and we asked him some questions about the book. And sometimes he gave us answers. Oh, that's it. And sometimes he said, I don't know. For example, the scene in which the car is moving down the freeway and it's being pulled over closer and closer to the opposing traffic, and it finally crashes. That didn't have Tyler Durden in it, in the book. It had 3 space monkeys from Project Mayhem. One of them was the driver. And we said, why wouldn't that have Tyler in it? And Chuck said, that's a brilliant idea. I said, yeah, well, we definitely want it to be Tyler, and we want, more talking about Jack trying to talk about their relationship, and Tyler trying to say, you and I no longer matter. This is bigger than our relationship. So that's how the scene came out. But what basically happened was Chuck was supportive. He was wonderful. He thought I captured, his voice really well. And basically, he told me he went back and rewrote his first book after he read the first draft of Fight Club. But anyway, he was fun. We became friends with him. I mean, I'm still friends with Chuck. And so is David. So it worked out. We had a novelist who appreciated what we were doing.
I imagine while working on the script, you had several drafts of the material. I'm curious what was the hardest part? What took you the longest to achieve? What was the most troublesome period of work? What was the aspect that you had to change the most during the work on the continuous drafts of the script?
If you go back and read the book, the clues are unbelievably piled up all over the place that they're the same person. I mean, I went back and read the book, and it had been a while. And I just thought, my God, he's telling you that they're the same person practically from the beginning. I mean, there are a lot of clues. And I realized that there have to be some, but, I guess at the time, I just realized that, there can't be too many. We can't just give it away. So 2 things had to happen. One was Tyler had to be a 3-dimensionally developed person. You had to believe that this was a person. This is a separate human being. He couldn't just be a messiah. So it seemed like when he worked as a projectionist or as a waiter, you humanized him some, and then Jack became a prankster with him when they both were waiters, Another thing was that Marla had to be, not only did she have to be 3-dimensional, she had to be really caught up mentally with this Tyler guy. So all of these relationships had to be real, even though it was going to be exposed that there was no Tyler eventually. But I think working on it and making sure that it seemed like he was totally real as real as everybody else, was one of the jobs that had to be done. It was hard because he's an exceptionally interesting person with ideas about how society should be and shouldn't be. And it's very easy to fall into having him simply be a mouthpiece for those ideas. And I had to make it so that he was that way, but he was human. And another thing was, I did have to make him a messiah. I had to make him the kind of person that the people would follow into Project Mayhem, which is not the same as Fight Club. It's taking it up a notch, as he said. So I had him get into a fight with the owner of the bar they were using. I mean, that's totally not in the book. I mean, I'm not even sure if it's called Lou's Tavern in the book, but you know, it might be. But I had the guy come down, I'm Lou, you know, and Tyler lets him really beat the crap out of him in front of everybody. And they're just awestricken. And he sits down and begins to give out assignments for Project Mayhem. And it begins. That was a lot of that was just when we first talked about what was necessary. You know, like I said, the scene where they meet, and then that scene where he lets Lou beat him up. Scenes like that. First, we talked about them in the abstract, but to actually write them and have them work is different. It's harder than talking about them in the abstract. So I think basically the big places where the story moves forward and those were they were hard to write. The book doesn't happen in the same order either. We created an order for the events that we thought worked for a film better. So I would say every time there was a major event that was hard to write. I mean, I rewrote them, of course.
Okay, so we have quite a big audience with us. So maybe there are some questions from you at this point. Yeah, I see over here.
So I know this is an adaptation, so you already had a character to write for, but what was the character development like when you were writing the screenplay, especially with respect to his psychology and having to write for someone that was especially also talking to himself? What was that experience like?
He had to be who he was talking to was difficult to conceive. I mean, was he talking to himself? I don't think that we eventually we settled on that being an idea that worked too well. So we simply had him talk as if he's talking to the audience. And I know that you know, breaks the fourth wall. And we didn't really break the fourth wall. We never had, I mean, except, you know, there's some moments where it looks like he's looking at the audience, but it's not, we didn't really do that. We just had him talk without an explanation of who the narrative would be to. Again, that was kind of inspired by Sunset Boulevard. I mean, William Holden was dead, and he was narrating the movie, starting with him being dead, and he narrates the whole film. Who is he talking to? So we just decided to have it be unexplained, like as if he is talking to the audience, but we're not acknowledging that he's talking to the audience. He's just talking about himself. You know, there's sometimes when in narration he does refer to things, but for the most part, it's just going along like that's another track of his mind is to talk about himself, but not to himself, really. So that's the kind of thinking we had for it.
And when you develop the characters, I heard that sometimes you use the method of interviewing them, interviewing your own characters. And I'm curious, did you use that method on that film, and how was it, basically? Because I can imagine it could be quite a cool interview actually to do.
Yeah, the way I did use it, the technique, and I have on everything I've written. And the way it works is it starts off with me asking a question and getting an answer. The only rule that sort of is like, you just have to have the rule is they have to answer the question, but they can spend a lot of time trying to avoid it, but they have to answer it. I mean, because you couldn't do it if you didn't have that rule. But they also, the characters start to talk back to me and ask me questions. What about your life? Who are you? What do you? Ask me that, and I get into it with it, and we really have, like, it turns into a scene. And invariably, it's both oppositional confrontation and it's commiserating together and laughing together. It has all those sort of junctures in it each time I do it with a character. But the main thing is, when I'm done, I feel like there's no doubt that I was just with someone. And when I feel that way, I know that I've done what I wanted to do with the interview. And, a lot of information comes out that, say doesn't exist, either if it's in an adaptation, it's not in the source material, or if it's original, you've never thought of it before. And it's usable information. It's something you can put into a scene. So I also get that from the interviews. So I don't know, I guess it's a form of me having schizophrenia, maybe. I don't know.
So you're the right person for the job, I guess, to write this film then. Okay, do we have any more questions from the audience? Yeah, over here.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Hi.
All characters in your movie are very brutal, very psychopathic, very negative. But this kind of character could be also more complicated, more interesting. Why they are so similar to each other? And the next question, did you ever heard about this kind of organization in the real life in the US? Thanks.
You mean this type of mental disease, or is that what you said?
I'm asking about the colors of the psychopathic characters. This was the first. And the second question was about the real organization, like Fighting Club. Maybe you heard about this. Or
okay, yeah.
You can show an example from real life. Ku Klux Klan, for example, or something like this.
Is that right? Because that's great to point that out, because that is something I kept an eye on, was they had to be, they were clearly different. Jack worked at a corporation. Tyler was just, wild, insane person. You don't even know. He had various small jobs here and there. But I also knew they had to be similar in some way. And even Marla had to be similar to both of them. And that was, a lot of that I knew that. And then when I wrote it, it was instinctual, I guess, because you can't think about that too much, or, you'll kind of go astray. As far as real organizations, yeah, I mean, I think I heard about the first real Fight Club within, I mean, less than a year after the release of the movie in 1999. So sometime in the year 2000, I heard about there's real Fight Clubs. They're really happening. And I was just, you know, I didn't know what to say. It was, I guess if they do their own rules and they make sure that they stop and they don't maim or kill anyone, then whatever, you know. They may or may not be discovered and arrested, but I certainly didn't get involved in any real Fight Clubs myself. But yes, I've heard about them ever since the movie came out. Every year I hear about them. And Project Mayhems too, which is more scary because they're trying to do bigger things. And the ideology is just against civilization itself. It's not like any other ideology out there. It's just, we don't want civilization. So anyway, yes, I don't know what to do about it, but there's real Fight Clubs. And there's real Project Mayhem groups out there.
Okay, so following the thought I can imagine there was a lot of discussion about you know,
I don't know what's happening. Let me start. Wow, that's crazy. I think I'm being attacked by Project Mayhem right now.
Okay, so that's what you would call a comic relief, I guess.
Yeah.
And okay, so following that thought, I can imagine there was a lot of controversy about the film, you know, it being you know, nihilistic and such, and sadistic maybe in a way also with the characters. And this is these are the questions that are and the controversies that follow all such films. I mean, you mentioned The Clockwork Orange, a film that was you know, it was forbidden to be screened in many parts of the world. Sunset Boulevard, maybe no, but it was, again, it was a very controversial film to be made at that time in the 50s in the US. You know, Bill Wilder, it was very out of the maybe not a typical classical Hollywood film as we would call, starting with the character floating in the swimming pool, face down. And were you afraid that it would be too much, that it would be too hardcore, maybe let's call it, and too controversial? You said that it was passed on by the studios, that it was hard to film it, to find financing for it.
You know, studios passed on it, yeah, but they passed on it because they didn't think it could be a movie.
Did you hesitate? You know, maybe let's not incorporate that scene in the film. Maybe it's too much. Did you have any doubts while working on the script?
Well, you see, when I wrote the script, you know, I would say that what's happening, but I don't decide what actually is seen on the camera. That was David, right? And you know, I knew that there was a lot of satirical commentary about society, you know, and I didn't think very much about violence, even though I was writing it. Then I saw the rough cut and how you know, David really had these people beating the crap out of each other and blood all over the place. And you know, when Big Bob has his head blown off, and I understood. I mean, I talked to him about it, but I understood it while I watched it. Is that he wasn't going to have it float away without the substance of what these guys were actually doing. It had to have the consequence of being, you know, ugly violence, because they were really fist fighting, and Big Bob really got shot in the head. And Fincher wanted the stuff to be real, even though it continued to have the feeling of social commentary after you'd seen very bloody things happen. So I think that was kind of his style on top of what I gave him, was this is going to be real people. And we're not going to make a cartoon. You know, so that's what happened. It was very violent. But, you know, it's not a gun violent movie. I mean, Big Bob is shot. But compared to, you know, a normal Hollywood movie that has violence in it, they have guns firing and killing people right and left. We didn't do that. And the fights in Fight Club had to stop when one person wanted to stop. So, you know, it was, I think, harshly criticized because it was, the timing was such that it was, you know, blamed for just putting out this negative vibe in the general atmosphere. But in reality, compared to gun violent movies, which can be over the top, it was not like that, I don't think. And it had a reason to exist besides, and its reason to exist was not to enjoy watching violence at all. And I don't think it comes across that way.
Okay, so we have another question over there, the lady in the back. Okay, over here, sorry.
Hello, and thank you for your time. Comparing the screenplay and the book, we see vividly that in the screenplay we have more colorful and deeper characters and also secondary characters. And all of them are dealing with a certain mental issues. How was the research process for these characters, especially for Martha? Marla, sorry.
Marla, yeah. Actually, I'm glad you asked that because I wanted to do a lot more with it. Why was she attracted to someone who abused her emotionally and physically, but mostly emotionally? Like, we're done, get out of the house. And so I spent a lot of time on that, reading about it. These kind of relationships where it's you'd think that the abused person would walk away, but there's reasons they don't, and they're compelling. And we just, you know, we didn't have time. We didn't have time to put in some of the stuff that I was bringing up about Marla. I mean, it's a 2.5-hour movie as it is, and I wanted to do a lot of this with why Marla was in this relationship, why she needed to be treated that way. Because in the end, what we discover is that the character we're calling Jack invented Tyler so he could get Marla. That's why the whole thing happened. He didn't have the, if you want to call it chutzpah or whatever, to, you know, ask her out or anything. So he created a Superman. And that's who was in his mind, in a relationship with her. But she knew she was in a relationship with the same guy that went to support groups and where they met, you know. She knew all along that it was this guy. She was just confused by why he would seem to be two different people. You know, he's like this way, and then he's like this, you know. And we believed that she could have that opinion about Jack by himself. so that when she said that, 1 minute you're this, 1 minute you're that, you know, or I think that's probably after we exposed that it was the same person. But I did research as well on the idea of hallucinating another person and being them. I mean, that was the hardest part about all of this, was the condition that Jack had, because he is not only experiencing another person who doesn't exist, but he is seeing that person do things physically, and in reality, he himself is doing them all. I couldn't really find a disease mentally that was exactly like that. You know, there's hearing voices. There is seeing people, but there's not so much that you control what the hallucination is doing. It just does whatever it does. So that was difficult. And all I did was I just decided, well, we'll stay with the way Chuck did it in the book, you know. We'll have it be another person, and then we'll reveal it's not another person, it's the same person. But to answer the question about research, yes, I did do that. And it's kind of scary, but there are cases of things very similar to this. What happens to Jack, where he not only turns into another person, but the person he is normally turns into another person, but also watches as himself the other person he turned into. Rare, very rare. But I found some cases that got really close to being like that. And, you know, they don't really know what to do about it, somebody who has that problem. So anyway, I researched until it scared me, and then I stopped researching. Basically.
Okay, so I guess this is the right moment to stop, I guess. Okay, lady in the back.
I wanted to address my question to the topic of violence, which you were talking about a few minutes ago. I have it written down because I would forget it because of the stress. So I'm sure you've heard the theory, if I can call that a theory, about Fight Club. I mean the one that the movie presents the view of toxic masculinity. What do you think about it? And was it on my mind, your mind, while writing the script?
What was interesting is that right at that time, I think by the time Fight Club, the publisher actually, put it in book form and put it on the shelf for sale, which happened sometime in the middle of my doing drafts of the script. Susan Faludi, feminist writer, put out a book called Shafted, which was looking at how men felt about a diminution of, is that the word, diminution, of their place in society, that women were sort of moving up and men were. So she was taking a look at men feeling shafted, feeling put down, and it was. I mean, I couldn't believe that book came out at the same time Fight Club, the book, came out, and so we thought about it as. That they were, we didn't think of it as toxic masculinity back then. we thought of it as people who had become completely drones in their life. It just had no meaning and were becoming numb to existence. Went into this and fought each other and brought back some kind of primal male feeling of empowerment. And they didn't go out until Project Mayhem. They didn't cause any destruction. Then they did, because once Project Mayhem started, Tyler was becoming the antagonist. He didn't start that way, but we had to make him become wrong at some point, because he was not going to stop until civilization was destroyed. But that's, at some point, that's the bad guy, and it has to be that way. So it times out a little bit before we know it's the same person, when we still think they're separate, but we know Tyler is starting to he's going, this is too much. And then we reveal they're the same person. Then it still doesn't matter. Jack has to stop Tyler anyway, even though he knows that Tyler is his own projection. The Marla thing, one of the reasons, I mean, I'm bringing it up again, but one of the reasons I wanted to go into the psychology of an abusive relationship is that Tyler did not treat her well. And that was not the story of the men who joined Fight Club or even Project Mayhem. They were not being taught to be brutal or insensitive to women. And I wanted to make Marla more understandable so that we could understand the entire relationship between Tyler and Marla. And like I said, it's already a 2.5 hour movie. But so at the time, Susan Faluti's book was basically saying a lot of the same things Fight Club was saying. At the time, there was an idea that men couldn't be men, and they were grumbling about it. Now we know about toxic masculinity, and certainly Project Mayhem and Fight Club are both examples of that now. That is not how you be a man. And I think to some extent, Jack at the end of the movie is has realized that. Well, we didn't want him to give a speech, so I said, what if he just says, you met me at a weird time in my life? But he knows it's wrong, all of it, by the end of the movie. I think he emanates that. I know he doesn't say it. I know the movie doesn't pronounce it in any way. But I think he's turned his back completely on the idea of Fight Clubs, Project Mayhem, of having to define masculinity with violence and destruction. So in a way, he was ahead of his time being against toxic masculinity, because that's where he ends up. He's against it. And then the movie's over. But so I mean, I like to think of that moment as being somewhat prescient of what would be coming later, where we would start to really understand that the older definitions of masculinity are just not good. And maybe this movie found a way of still saying that, and that's why it's still watched, because it does really end with an anti-toxic masculinity sentiment So I guess in a way it was like, it was right for its own time in 1999. And in a different way, it's right for today. I hope.
Okay, a gentleman over here.
Thank you. You have mentioned that the material, the story in the book and the movie is organized differently. It is, and it's brilliant, I think, in the film. Could you tell us how you went about it, how you felt it had to be changed, and if you work with sequences, and how much of this drama organization of the film went into remaking the book into the film?
Well, thank you. You know, David and I just talked through a story. And we first did it by talking exactly like the novel went. It didn't feel like it really worked as a movie. And it was a matter of really placing some scenes in a different place. Like I remember that the car accident scene was definitely not in the same place that it was in the book. And when the police get Jack and they're about to cut him because they're in Project Mayhem, that was not only set differently, I think it was on a bus or something in the book. And we were like, if it's going to be police, let's have the guy go to the police station, you know? And so it was really just talking through a story. And when we did it, we found that, oh, this would make more sense if it was after this. And this would make more sense if it was before this. It was just that simple, really. And then there was, of course, the scenes that had to be created whole cloth. And we knew where they went. And we knew abstractly what we wanted them to do. And then David said, you know, good luck. Unfortunately, he liked him when I brought him back. But yeah, it was feeling the story through, both of us, just feeling it, you know, oh, this, you know, the logic would hit us. Well, he wouldn't do that before he did that. So we would have things like that. And we just sort of spun our own order of events from instinct, really.
Hi. So I know that David Fincher needed to fight with the studio for his ending of his previous film, Seven. Did you have any similar situations that studio said that some of the scenes went too far and you can't show it to the people? Do you had some kind of these problems during the making of the film?
Well,
can you
know how executives watch rushes, you know, that's whatever was shot that day. They watch it. While they were seeing these support groups for terminal disease without any narration. And they were like, this is the most depressing. What are you going to do with it? Well, I mean, if you don't hear Jack talk his voice over it, you don't understand, you know, the bizarre kind of edgy humor he adds to it. So it was, it was just, I mean, it was just funny that they saw rushes and that's all they saw. I mean, later they got it. But Bill Mechanic, who was running Fox, I'm not Laura Ziskin, who ran Fox 2000, but Bill Mechanic ran the studio, period, on production. And he said, I mean, he's supportive, but he said he thought it was a thriller with some social commentary. He said, I don't think there's anything funny in this. Now, this was when it was in script form. He said, no, I don't. No. It's a thriller, psychological thriller. Guys going insane. You know, there's no humor in it. And then when he saw it, the rough cut, he like everybody else, we were all laughing at all the places all the way through where it was funny. And it was funny in kind of a sick way. But that's when he sort of got it. The studio, Brad Pitt had some kind of a dental piece, you know, in his mouth, and he took it out to have broken teeth. I mean, and then later he had, you know, the dentist put it back in, but he did that for the film. And I mean, Laura Ziskin thought that was, I mean, she was starting to think people were going crazy. Like, you know, that was a crazy thing to do. And then Marla had the line, oh, Tyler, I want to have your abortion. And Laura said, really, can you change that? I mean, that's, yeah. So Fincher, and it was his line, not mine. I mean, I fell over when I heard it. But I haven't had sex like that since grade school. And then Laura said, no, change it back. You can have the abortion line, you know. And he didn't. But there wasn't anything big in terms of you can't or whatever. I don't even remember that coming up about the blood, you know. So it was a very lucky time for that movie to be made by that studio. It was just very fortunate. Film mechanic, it was a film school graduate. That doesn't usually happen in the executive core of Hollywood. And Lloyd Ziskin was really, really keen on everything that we were doing to take the book and make the film. So we were in a supportive environment. They actually gave David more money while he was shooting. I mean, that's like unheard of. So it was just very fortunate that the film was made then. You know, a few years earlier, it wouldn't have been made. A few years later, it wouldn't have been made. It obviously wouldn't have been made after 9/11, 2001, because of the ending, even though the buildings are empty. So it was lucky. We didn't have people yelling at us to change this or do that. You know, it just wasn't there.
Okay, over here.
Following on what you just said, I was really interested in the changes to the end between the book and the film, and there seem to be two really major changes. One of which is that in the book it's Marla and the people from the groups who come to sort of save him, and it's sort of them saving the Jack character. And I wonder if that had something to do with a kind of self-realization in the arc of Jack's character that you wanted to do. And I also wonder, at what point in the rewrite process did you decide to have the buildings explode? Because we don't get this bang in the book, right? So was that something that you saw immediately that you would need for the structure? You would need a kind of payoff at the end, or did that happen in the rewrite process? Thank you.
I think it was during the process of being into drafts of it, of rewrites of it. The thing is that one of the things Tyler lacked in the book was a direction forward, you know. And we respected that because he was just a nihilist. It was just whatever. You know, we'll just cause destruction wherever we go because civilization is wrong. We wanted him to actually have a plan where he'd get close to really causing civilization to fall apart. And I originally wrote that the city where all the buildings were was Delaware. was in Delaware. What is it? Sorry. Anyway, there's a city that all of the credit cards have their headquarters there. And I mean, not your bank that you get it from, but the main company, American Express, Visa, MasterCard, these are all in the same city. Because of, you know, obviously there must be some kind of tax break or something. But I wanted it to be named, and I did name it, that it was taking place in Delaware. And David didn't want it named. So that went out. But the idea stayed, which was that he targeted financially important buildings, basically, and got all the people out of them and blew them up. And the idea would be that it would begin to cause a domino effect of a lot of problems with the financial system. And that would lead to, you know, some destruction of civilization. So we were giving him a plan. He didn't have that in the book. And we didn't know how we were going to end it, because the book has a bomb that's diffused. It's the only time that Chuck kind of breaks his own rule, because he says, the reason I know about where the bomb is because Tyler knows. Well, that's not how those two worked the whole time. We thought they were two separate people. Jack didn't know something because Tyler knew. He didn't know anything that Tyler was doing, unless he was doing it with Tyler. So we knew that idea just couldn't work. I know where to diffuse it because Tyler knows. Can't do it. But we had thought that he would diffuse the book. You know, there would be no explosions. And we thought that because, you know, the book was that way, and we just figured that's how it should end. And then I think that we sort of, I don't know, it sort of hit us that if we see what Tyler was really planning, if we see the beginning of it, it's more powerful. So we decided to go ahead and have the buildings get blown up. It's not because, and that's whatever the result of that is, it will be whatever. But there's no Tyler anymore, and there's not going to be any Project Mayhem anymore. But we get a glimpse of the kind of madness vision that this, you know, sort of messianic, nihilistic leader had in mind as we permanently leave him, and Jack can be himself with Marla. So having them watch it and knowing that would have gone on, that would have kept going. Tyler would have kept being that way. And we saw what it looked like in the beginning. Buildings being blown up. It just made Tyler it was a more powerful thing to show what his intention was. And now is not going to happen. But that's how dangerous this person really was. And that's how serious he was. And that's how his followers were serious. And it just seemed to be a more powerful statement about it. Yeah, it's a good thing that Tyler doesn't exist anymore. So, I mean, that's why we had the building to blow up. But I'm not sure if you asked something else, because the image froze. Was there two parts to the question? Or? not.
Just about Marla and the other members of the groups coming to save him when he's about to shoot himself. Like we don't have that in the script, and I wondered if you wanted to have his salvation come from him instead of coming from some.
Well, they don't. They're not running there to try to. I mean, he shoots himself, and then they're like concerned about him, and they get him.
Yes. So I was wondering why they aren't there in the film.
Sorry, what's that?
So I was wondering why they aren't there. The other members of the groups. There's this image of people in wheelchairs coming up to him after all that stuff. Why you didn't want that in the movie?
Well, I mean, the book had a coda kind of that Chuck wrote it as if it was the afterlife, as if Jack was dead. This is, I mean, I guess heaven, or at least a pleasant place, but it's where dead people were. And you realize that as he's narrating, I mean, writing it, that it's a psychiatric hospital. And we just thought it was like having another ending. You have an ending, and then you have an ending again. And I mean, I think David was more against that scene than I was, but I could see his point. You could feel like, oh my God, you already ended the movie, and now you're putting another ending on it, you know? And also, we didn't want him to be either dead or put into a psychiatric institute. We didn't want that to be what happened to him. So we cut that out, basically.
When we talk about this film now, of course, we know it as a cult classic film, known all around the world, still very controversial in many ways. Once the mentioned critique for maybe it being sexist or misogynist, then we hear that in China it was censored, and I know that still some people say that it's glorifying, violence and so on. Mainly maybe because the characters are so cool in the film, and so appealing in a way. But I'm curious because it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was not a great success at the beginning in the box office. That it grew, the film grew in a way in time, and still it really was a big thing. And I'm curious for you personally, as it being one of your first major projects and so on, how it affected you, this kind of huge success at the beginning of your career.
Well, when I saw the rough cut with everybody was there, the cast and the crew, and so we watched the rough cut, and the execs, and producers, and all that, and I thought, wow, two things hit me. One was, this is a masterpiece. I mean, because of Fincher, David Fincher's masterpiece. But also, I thought, no one's going to go see this movie. And I went home, and it was in the daytime, and I started drinking, which I don't drink in the daytime, but I did then. I just did not know how this was going to be sold to the public, how they were going to understand what they were, going to see enough to go out to the theater and see it. Then I had the experience of Ross Bell and I went around in a limo, but we went around to the theaters that were showing it on opening night. I mean, this wasn't the premiere. This was when the movie was released in the country, right? We were going around some Los Angeles theaters. And it just so happened by accident that the first theater we went to, we were catching the first part of the movie. And the second theater we went to, we were catching the middle of the movie. And the third theater, we were watching the end. So that was just insanely, unexplainable luck, I guess. But what was interesting was the theaters were packed. I mean, I saw some people sitting in the aisle, which you're not supposed to be able to do. And they were laughing at every place that we wanted it to be funny, you know. And I thought, and I heard some people coming out after a showing ended. This was near the end of the evening. And it was two women who were, you know, a little bit older than middle-aged. And they were both saying this, wow, one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I couldn't believe it. And so I thought it's going to be a big hit. And it wasn't. Domestic release, which takes in the box office, takes in the United States and Canada as one region. It's called the domestic dollars that come in from the movie. And that's usually the first place they release is the United States and Canada. It was a disappointment in relation to budget, meaning it should have made more. It covered its cost, but, you know. And then we found out that, you know, in some European countries, I found out about England and I'm not sure if it's France, but anyway, did the same money as Star Wars. They were crazy over it, and so it was like, well, what's going on? What makes whoever like it? I mean, so but one thing was for sure is that it was not marketed very well. I don't think. I mean, I had friends tell me that, oh, I'm going to see it, Jim. I just haven't yet. I'm not a big fan of boxer movies. Boxer movie? I mean, these were intelligent people. I just don't think they didn't really know how to sell it. So thank God for DVDs, because then everything changed. And it just remains a DVD that sells or a film that gets bought for streaming now. Its afterlife saved, you know, in a big way, saved it. So I'm happy about that, of course.
Okay, any last questions from the audience over there?
Hello, Jim. My question is very, very simple. Are you working on something new right now?
Yes. In fact, it's a pilot for a series. You know, I mean, with television, they make decisions as you go along. So right now, it's just a script for a pilot. I haven't really started it yet. It is based on a novel. And this time, the lead character is a female CEO who has a voiceover. The book is written, I mean, in the same way Fight Club was, it's written in a first-person narration, and it works well for voiceover. The novel, I think, is a little bit too straight on serious. It has thriller elements to it, but I saw the comedy immediately when I was reading it. So I'm changing it to some degree. But it's called, right, I mean, the novel is called The Glitch, but I don't think we will call the show that, because there is a very popular show on Netflix already called Glitch. So I don't know what it'll be called yet. And I don't know if it'll be a series yet. I just know that that's the pilot I'm working on. And it has some similarities, I guess.
Okay, I wish you the best.
Thank you.
Okay, but that's not the end yet. Hopefully, we have a few more minutes. So maybe a gentleman over there.
Okay, thank you. So the first rule of Fight Club is we do not talk about Fight Club. So are you safe there?
Well, when I was at the Austin Film Festival, two writer friends of mine were on a panel with me, and somebody asked a question about Fight Club. I mean, it didn't happen immediately. It happened kind of in the middle of it. And I started to talk, and they got out of their chairs, and they acted like they were beating the crap out of me. But so that's. I mean, they weren't, but that's the only time I ever got like a physical reaction to breaking the rule, so to speak.
We had a chance to watch this movie once again just before the meeting started, and it was still like fresh and impressive. I'm wondering, what was it like for your generation and maybe like your younger colleagues in late 90s to develop such a movie like a Fight Club? I mean, in terms of human crisis, economy, values, because we see all these topics like reflects in this movie, right? This IKEA boy, he's called IKEA boy. So like, what was it like at that era to be a human being at the end of millennium? Because as we can see, it reflects in this movie, all this crisis. Thank you.
Well, I mean, the main thing this movie was making a comment on was the nature of civilization itself, you know. So it was like stepping back and taking a look at how we live, every aspect of how we live. And of course, Tyler had a nihilistic, destructive feeling that it was wrong. The whole idea was wrong of civilization, and we're not ready to give it all up and not have civilization anymore. So it ended up being that he had to be wrong, and he was wrong. I mean, civilization has given us obviously a lot, and we want it to continue to improve, but we don't want it taken away. So I think the end of the 90s was a time when, I was talking about how we were really lucky to be doing Fight Club when we were where we were doing it. But also, I think a lot of films were very experimental. And that was a period it almost was like a revival of what the 70s were like in American film. It was, anything goes. So, and that's the year that Being John Malkovich came out, and it was a studio film. So, studios were making things that seemed like independent films. So it was a good time because we were getting that kind of support. It was kind of movie stars. It was like the studio system turned good for a little while. I don't know why, really. It must have been because maybe a little bit earlier in the 90s, actual independent films were beating the crap out of studio film. So the studios decided to relax a little bit and do some experimentation. So we felt that when we were working on it. We knew we were doing it for Fox, so it was just like a magic time, I guess.
Okay, so maybe a last question from the gentleman in the back.
Thank you. So I want to ask about, because you mentioned about the technique of interviewing your characters, maybe you can tell us something more about it, or maybe use some other techniques. That's my first question. And the second question is, do you involve your personal experience or life experience, of course, into the script? Like, for example, you struggle about something in your life right now. Do you involve it into the script, into your ideas?
Yeah, well, I don't know what more to say about character interviews. I mean, the main thing is I go until they are in total control of themselves, and they can push back and ask questions of me, and it turns into a scene between me and another living human being. I write them until they get there, and then of course I keep going. And at some point I end it, but they can be very long. But that's really has to happen. And that's the whole point, is to be me facing off with a real person. And if I stay at it, if anyone does it and stays at it, you'll get there. You'll get there. The person will start becoming their own entity. And so I think it's a great tool for character development. I forgot what the second question was.
Hello. So the second question was, for example, if you struggle in your life, you have or you have some experience, do you put like something from your life to the script, or you just or your life is not involving in the script? Script is.
Oh, I see what you mean. Different. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's always something. You know, I found a video of myself that I'd made years earlier, like in the 80s, I guess, of just my own fist coming in, but you couldn't see. Anyway, you couldn't see that it was mine, and hitting myself, you know, just for fun, just making fun, and I added noises to it, you know, just to be like it, just as a joke, and it was exactly like Edward Norton beating himself up in the office of his boss, and I was kind of shocked about that because, I mean, even though I wrote it, and it's a scene in the book. I don't know how much it goes into it, but he beats himself up to call security. You know, when security comes, they think that the boss did it because it's such a pounding he gives himself that you're not going to believe that he did it to himself. You're going to believe the boss did it, and that's how he gets whatever he wants from the boss. You know, pushing a shopping cart with all that stuff in it, you know, and says that Fight Club now has corporate sponsorship. But I think that I didn't like put a scene in that was a scene in my life, but I always feel a certain, if I'm really into something, that it somehow is reflecting some things that I've experienced. And this did, particularly when it got into the corporate world and the working that kind of job, and how you feel about your boss and all that kind of stuff. That was, you know, real for me for, you know, before I was making money as a writer. So I, you know, got a little bit of revenge in that, but it still mostly followed what the book had. But, you know, intuitive feelings that you get, whether you're doing it pretty close to the source material or you're making up a scene entirely, which I had to do repeatedly with that. There's always something from your own life that's in it, you know, not necessarily literally, but intuitively there. So that's, I guess, would be my answer.
Okay, so we're coming to an end of our meeting. We got a glimpse of your dog, I think, in the background. So this is my final question. What's the name of your dog?
Luna.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, Jim Uhls was our guest and his dog, Luna. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching it, too. I appreciate it.